I'm just going to say a few high-level words, and I actually think a lot of the speakers touched upon some really important issues. This session is about looking at innovation and jobs for the future from two entrepreneurs, their perspective, and they're going to talk about their journeys, how they got there, and some of the insights that they bring with them. However, what I want to do first is really talk about the university's side of delivering as an economic powerhouse. And a lot of the messages have already been made, but I just want to remind everyone, innovation does, we are a world-leading university in terms of our research, but we have a very strong legacy of innovation as well. You only have to look at our history, particularly even because we were talking about life sciences earlier, the use of the ultrasound, the penicillin, there's lots that the University of Glasgow has brought to the world in terms of innovation. We have the privilege here to be sitting in the James McCune Smith. He was the first African-American ever to be awarded a medical degree from the university, and that was from the University of Glasgow. So how do we build in that? In my current role as Vice Principal for Economic Development and Innovation here, there are some things that I want to do to supercharge our contribution to innovation, economic development, and actually jobs for the future. And what we're really focused on now is actually, Kasim, you touched upon a lot of these messages in your presentation, so you've saved me a lot of time and us a lot of time as well. But really, it's about translation. How do we translate our world-leading research and really support commercialisation? A lot of that is about culture. A lot of that is about enabling our researchers and academics to think about being entrepreneurial, to really have that drive and that motivation and that support behind them to start translating their ideas into real-world impact. We also want to engage a lot more in knowledge transfer, and it picks up on the question the gentleman asked just before the session. How do we start working better with industry? How do we take our solutions to industry's doorstep, and how do we bring you in to be able to help answer some of the questions that you need our research for? The third pillar really is how do we strengthen our partnerships? And again, in that field of life sciences, that partnership between industry, academia, government and NHS, these partnerships are really important. But as a university with a strong civic mission, we really see our community as one of our partners as well. And a number of you have touched upon inclusive economic growth. And actually, if we want to deliver that, we have to embed that and really think of our community prospects for an opportunity for them as a core part of our enabling strategy. And finally, to deliver that tangible impact, it's about how do we make our prospects and our spin-outs scale up, stay here and become sticky to the region? How do we create those opportunities to bring production and manufacturing back? And hopefully this afternoon, you'll hear of a few success stories that are coming out of the University of Glasgow. But with that, I'm going to stop and I'm going to pass over to our speakers. And our first entrepreneur perspective really here is Jim. He needs no introduction, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing you because I want you to bring out your story in what you say. So everyone, welcome Jim, please. Thank
you. Okay, so today I was asked to share my story. It's a story that includes education, engineering, opportunity, and the skills and the work ethic that I developed as a Scot building a global career in technology. My hope is it translates today somewhat into the challenges and the opportunities that we see both as a nation, but also as a society in general. I've entitled this From Glasgow to Gothenburg, with a few stops in between. Education that leads to knowledge that can be applied to drive innovation, which in turn leads to invention that with scale can lead to national prosperity, I believe is the key. So let's start with that. Let's start with education. In my family, my oldest sister was the first person on either side of her parents' history to attend university. She did so in this fine city at Strathclyde University and later go on to complete a PhD in chemistry, which fueled a lifelong career in research and development. That was the first fracture in the premise that the past defines the future. And our family grew that day. Not a new branch, our family tree grew not a new branch, but it grew new roots which were going to be nourished by education. My further education initially took the vocational route, and I completed a mechanical engineering apprenticeship on the south side of this city, working for a company that made heavy industrial equipment for sugar refineries in the then dwindling shipbuilding industry. It was a cold, grimy, noisy factory, but with many brilliantly skilled machine workers punching time cards simultaneously on tickets to maximize piecework bonus payments. Time bonus calculations all done mentally to within the penny. To add to the Dickensian vibe, we also had a few very unsavory characters as part of this tapestry. Let's just say it was a learning-rich environment. But I had high expectations of work ethic, performance, problem solving, and the need to be able to stand up for yourself at a very early age. And of course, it was fully unionized, or to quote the terminology of the era, a closed shop. It was a factory like many others in the city at that time, and those factories provided, for those of us who hadn't quite decided or figured out what we want to do in life, other than secure an income and perhaps keep learning. Unfortunately, since then, the vocational route into industry and indeed into senior management has greatly diminished. And with that, many of the options now open to young people taking the first steps into their working life. Now, while I don't suggest going backwards towards the cold, noisy, grimy factories of the past, I do encourage creating many more and new innovative opportunities for young talent to find their footing, in addition to the opportunities of full-time college or university. I would also encourage widening the college and university curriculum to include more skills and experiential events to enable students to be more battle-ready for industry and commerce at a young age, thereby allowing them and the nation to compete on a global stage. But above all, I would encourage accelerating the knowledge base concerning four things: software, silicon, connectivity, and data. The interrelationship between these four items is what will drive the biggest development in technologies for decades to come, including AI in all its forms. Gen AI, agentic AI, AGI, and at some point, ASI, or artificial superintelligence. And that's the part that gets scary. These will significantly disrupt almost every single industry and every job, and it will profoundly change the way in which we learn as human beings. Now, in my career development, the single biggest opportunity came to me was when Scotland, realizing the demise of shipbuilding, coal mining, and steelworks, started to develop a strategy designed to attract industrial technologies of the future. Companies like IBM and Greenock, Motorola and Bathgate, Sun Microsystems in Linlithgow, Compaq Computers in Erskine, and in my own case, Digital Equipment Corporation in the fair town of Ayr, where a town surpasses for honest men and bonny lassies. These companies in turn created a huge ecosystem to service the large needs of the corporations and created opportunities of employment options. And quite often, these companies were homegrown Scottish companies who acted quickly to leverage the opportunities provided by these large multinationals. Two of my own startups fell into that category. And I, as well as many others, saw the change in landscape for what it was, a highway to the future with a fast lane towards a potentially new and international career. And although young, I had already been armed with an apprentice qualification, an HNC in engineering, a strong work ethic, expectations at high performance, and of course the ability to work with all manner of characters from my shop floor experience. With Digital Equipment Corporation as a catalyst towards learning and building my competence in new technology, this set in motion a career that would allow me to live and work in 5 different countries across 3 continents, working at sea level for some of the world's most innovative companies. BlackBerry in Canada, Dyson in Singapore, and Volvo Cars in Sweden. Now, I would have been happy to stay in Scotland and build my career here. But unfortunately, the foundations that created the investment structure for what at the time, and you can see me here, was called Silicon Glen, did not allow for that. It was not strong enough to support the future growth or any signs of real longevity. And today, the vast majority of the companies shown in this chart no longer exist in Scotland. For although these international technology companies brought factory jobs, the conditions and the structure of continual investment into the country was not tethered to the long-term needs of building the deeper competencies, the likes of product development, design, engineering, or even supply chain management. All of these roles stayed mainly in the home countries. And as the now famous saying is coined, designed in California, manufactured in China. Previously, that could have said manufactured in Cumbernauld. As a result, when Eastern Europe opened up and cheaper labour pools could be found there to service the large consumer economies of Europe, then all the jobs moved. And I, like many others from Scotland, followed. Talent, technology, and tax dollars flowed in the same direction. At which point in time, I had more Scottish friends living in Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic than I had back home here in Scotland. By contrast, Ireland directly connected tax incentives not easily to replicate to investments. And these weren't easy to replicate in Eastern Europe, and that provided much more stickiness and longevity for the Celtic Tiger. But learning from others can be of great advantage. And as the saying goes, the early bird may get the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese. Which brings us to today. The new technologies of today, and indeed the future, have created a very fertile landscape for those countries which are curious enough to understand the opportunities, bold enough to develop a strategy, and brave enough to embrace and invest. Singapore, where I lived for over a decade and served as an advisor to the Economic Development Board, stands as a beacon to how this can be achieved. But it requires several factors not yet in place in Scotland, not least of which is a sovereign wealth fund. Well-funded, well-constructed, and well-managed. This construct of a sovereign wealth fund differs greatly from the National Wealth Fund, the SNIB, or Scotland's Shared Prosperity Fund. And we need to think bigger. Much, much bigger. By contrast and comparison, Singapore, which is approximately 20% smaller than North Ayrshire, boasts a combined sovereign wealth fund of over £1 trillion, or $1.3 trillion, between GIC, Temasek, and CPF. Norway has a population almost identical to Scotland and has a sovereign wealth fund of $1.7 trillion. But investment for the future on its own won't be enough. We also must act quickly to close the widening productivity gap between the UK and specifically the US, as well as some European countries. Today, that productivity gap between the UK and the USA sits between 22 and 28%, and 10% lower than Germany. Without improving the productivity gap, the long-term value creation will become infinitely harder. In addition, as Dan mentioned earlier, the productivity to public sector, private sector funding ratio on R&D investment also lags greatly behind most developed countries. So the positive side, there is a plethora of choice for a country with the intellectual horsepower and learning capacity such as Scotland to invest and embrace. These technologies include multidisciplinary software development, low latency connectivity, cloud computation, energy and grid management, small modular reactors, hydrogen power, electrolysis, battery power management, quantum computing, next generation semiconductors, nanotechnologies, all manner of different types of sensors, low power LiDAR, 4D radar, cost reducing edge computing, and of course AI in all its wonderful technicolor. So today lies massive advantage for Scotland and indeed the UK as a whole. At this moment in time, there's a potent cocktail designed to our advantage that can enable a new wave of prosperity for our country. And to make this simple, and because I like alliteration, I've termed this the 8 L's of longevity. And these are: 1, legislation. Scotland and the UK are not restricted by having to align 27 member states to any revised legislation. This should enable speed and competitiveness. Owning its own currency should be another potential advantage. 2, learning. The great learning institutes of Scotland provide a bedrock upon which we can build, but build we must. 3, legacy. We have a history of innovation and turning innovation into invention. History gives us penicillin, the television, the telephone, the steam engine, world-changing inventions. But we look too much to the past to remind ourselves of our innovative DNA. Rather than inspire new thinking, we have to some extent romanticized this. The constant recycle of these great achievements risk being akin to having a picture of Bonnie Prince Charlie on the side of a biscuit tin. It is now time for the next chapter in Scottish innovation to be written. It's time to create a new list that our children will develop and that our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will recite these new changing inventions as eloquently and as frequently as we have done with the past. 4, law. We operate in an environment recognized the world over as fair and just and governed by the rule of law. And in today's turbulent world, that in itself holds real value. 5, leverage. Scotland is part of the United Kingdom. London is a financial powerhouse. The UK is part of the G7 and a nuclear nation. As part of the Commonwealth, building ties and rebuilding ties with Europe, and hopefully maintaining good relationship with both China and the USA brings political and commercial leverage. Once again, I would cite Singapore, where I saw firsthand how a very small country like Singapore used its political leverage and its international reputation to great advantage. 6, language. Let's not forget the tremendous advantage that comes from being a native English-speaking nation. 7, labour. We have the means to future develop a highly educated, skilled workforce with the strong work ethic and a character to succeed that can compete in any world stage with passion and with vigour and with purpose. And finally, 8, logistics. We're positioned in a time zone that allows daily connectivity between east and west with robust road and rail links that link us to Europe, both directly from Glasgow and from 4 airports in London. These are advantages of the logistics of today. But to bring this vision alive, we need to enable our young talent to embrace these opportunities and engage in the journey, a journey that can create something special and long-lasting, future-proof for the next generation. But many of our young people today are out of practice with what it takes to be successful in the global stage. In the last 3 years alone, I have traveled to China 14 times and visited 8 cities in China. From every visit, it was clear that speed, including the speed of learning, is at the very epicenter of their thinking. And this brings me back to education in all its forms. We need to educate our young people, not just in the technical tools and the business skills of tomorrow, but in the basic building blocks of how to work effectively together to build a culture of shared prosperity. Individualism, digital nomads, scrolling as a form of entertainment, working from home has all torn a fabric in the cultural collaboration, and we need to mend this. Over the years, I've been asked many, many times by young people, how do I progress? How do I get promoted? How do I get recognized for my contributions? But many things to be successful need absolutely zero talent whatsoever. Hard work, attention to detail, showing up in time, being willing to help others, building a network and having integrity, being transparent, being open-minded, being presentable, investing in personal hygiene. You don't need any of these to be successful in terms of talent. But of course, many people already do that. So I will leave you with this. For the benefit of maybe the younger people who are coming into the industry for the first time, to answer some of these questions, again, being a massive fan of alliteration, I'm going to leave you with my 8 C's of character building. 1, commitment. There is no substitute for hard work. And hard work beats talent, especially when talent doesn't work hard. The job is not done until the job is done, and there is a huge difference between motivation and self-discipline. Doing what needs to be done when you have absolutely zero motivation to get it done is when it gets tough, but that's when it counts. Working hard when no one's looking, that is the difference, and it's a key skill for young people to develop. Collaboration. Despite what your parents and your grandmother may have told you, it's not all about you. It's about the team. It's about the mission. It's about the outcome. Communication is the key skill to learning and how we really listen to others. Compassion, a much underrated skill in the business world, is not a soft skill, it's a life skill. For compassion is empathy put into action. Curiosity is the catalyst for continuous learning. So please don't be afraid to take a sideways move, a down move, or any move that leads to more learning and skills, gaining greater experience, or building a stronger network. Courage. Be prepared to speak truth to power, and be prepared for the consequences that often come from that. Consistency, follow through as it builds trust, and trust is the single best currency you can build as an individual. Finally, confidence. Believe in yourself, invest in yourself, and trust in yourself. For if you can't trust in yourself, how can you expect others to possibly do so? Now, it's my firm belief that today, amidst all the turbulence, the geopolitics, and the uncertainty, that there lies fantastic opportunities ahead. Companies and countries that find ways to invest in the key talents and technologies of the future will harvest these benefits for years to come. The combination of high computational silicon, artificial intelligence, low latency cloud connectivity, and energy security will provide the foundations to accelerate growth and prosperity like we've never seen before. I would go as far as to say that what happens in the next 5 years will define the industrial and the military landscape for the next 25 years. Thank you.
The graveyard shift.
Thanks very much, Jim. What we're going to do is we're going to move straight over to introducing Chris van der Kuil. And Chris is going to bring his own perspectives as a serial tech entrepreneur, so a move away from life sciences into the tech industry as well. So over to you, Chris.
Great. I'm sorry for your hunger. This is not part of a fasting program, but May 2026, the world will gaze with absolute focus on Holyrood. The world will not blink until events come to pass that will define the next generation of their lives. Absolutely naff all to do with the Scottish elections and everything to do with Grand Theft Auto 6 coming out from Rockstar North across the street from the Scottish Parliament. Yes, the Scottish Parliament is not the most important building in Edinburgh to the rest of the developed world. It is the Rockstar North studio in the Old Scotsman building. I maybe say that slightly flippantly, but this game, this cultural phenomenon, is the world's biggest entertainment franchise. This game has taken more time to develop and cost more, somewhere approaching $2 billion, than it took to build the Burj Khalifa, the world's largest. Let that settle in for a second. A single video game is a more monumental human endeavor than the largest physical structure we have ever built. That's what the games industry is. That's the industry that's right at the core of many of our businesses. And it's an industry, as I've just demonstrated, in which Scotland leads the world. It's not kind of competitive, it's there. We are the best at this. And the story for that, and we'll expand beyond Grand Theft Auto for sure, but the story for that begins, as David Sainsbury pointed out, right back in my hometown of Dundee. The city of jute, jam, and journalism, and now in the 21st century is epitomised by my 4J studios, the extra J of joysticks. We have, since the late 1980s and early 1990s, created a city where there are more game developers per head of population than anywhere else on earth. And that's even counting the fact that our pals at Rockstar North went off to the distant shores of Edinburgh. So if you cut back to the late 1980s in Dundee, what did it look like? Well, some people would say pretty desolate, pretty desperate. And indeed, it was the dying throes, and it looked like some peak, some wonderful things going on, but the dying throes of the jute industry, which was, turned Dundee into one of the richest cities on the planet at its peak. It was gone, absolutely gone completely. The Marshall Plan businesses that existed in Dundee of Levi Strauss, I can't remember the name of the fridge manufacturer that came over from the States, but NCR, which was actually pushing amazing technology into the world of cash machines, and Timex were somewhat in their dying throes, in the way that Jim talked about those Silicon Glen businesses of the 1990s. But out of those burning embers that were left of Timex came a glimmer of hope. Good old entrepreneurial legend in the UK, Sir Clive Sinclair, had decided that Dundee was the manufacturing base for the Sinclair Spectrum. And I remember when it launched in the mid-1980s, every single one of us aspiring geeks, we were desperate to get a hold of a Spectrum across the UK. And I would actually hypothesize for you that the Spectrum's responsible for the phenomenal software industry that we have in the UK today, maybe along with the BBC microcomputer. But I'm not going to waste time on that today. I'm going to tell you about the Spectrum in Dundee, manufactured the cheapest home computer anybody in the world had really seen at that point, selling for between 150 and 200 pounds, unless you lived in Dundee, where for the princely sum of a fiver and a well-positioned pack of Embassy Regal cigarettes, you could acquire a Sinclair Spectrum for home use. I personally had 6 at that point. But these were things mass manufactured, lots kind of slightly defective, not quite useful for full retail. Every kid in Dundee had one. And out of that, I promise you, came the games industry that's there today. David Jones, one of the founders of DMA, who originated the game called Lemmings, which in the early 1990s was an enormous success, bought by Sony. His company then went on to develop Grand Theft Auto. My own origin story comes from my best friend and I, who met at school when we were 11. We graduated from Edinburgh and Dundee in computer science, and I wanted to start a business up for some unknown reason. I spent about a year and a half thinking it wasn't going to be in games, and then after Ferrari and Porsche after Porsche passed me coming out the DMA car park, we decided that we were going to follow those. And there's David's point on cluster. If you know and you can see people achieve close by you, it becomes normal. You know, why do lots of people in LA go into the movie industry? Because everyone knows somebody from the movie industry. Dundee is the Hollywood of the games industry. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it really is. Everyone in Dundee knows somebody that works in the games industry. And about, where are we now, 2025, 15 years ago, pretty much, our lives changed. We'd built a fantastic business in games. We'd built one business, we'd sold it. We actually had a pretty poor exit process with that business, and we'd started again, and we were on business 2. We were about 5 years into business 2 with 4J Studios when the fateful call came to invite us up to Stockholm to meet the founders of Mojang, the guys who'd created Minecraft back in 09-10. And at that point, we saw that they had something special, and we were at a time in our career where we agreed to take risk and effectively take a piece of that Minecraft business and develop it here in Scotland. That decision that we made then has led us to become, alongside Rockstar, responsible for one of the most successful games ever made. A game that we thought would possibly sell 1 million or 1.5 million copies, went on, in our case, to sell 70 million copies, 260 million pieces of extra content that we built for it as a franchise that sold 300 or 400 million copies globally. Almost as good as a blockbuster drug, to be honest. But we went on, and that went on to be bought by Microsoft a few years ago for over $2.5 billion, 5 years after it came out of bedroom in Stockholm. That's the speed and pace which games can change the fortunes of those involved with them and build scale. So that journey continues in Dundee, and I don't have time between here and your lunch to tell you about the phenomenal number of successes that are happening, but believe me, it's only the beginning. And it's the beginning of a scale-up and cluster story that I truly think can be enormously impactful on the Scottish economy, not just a nice sideshow or part of a bigger story. And that comes down to one thing that I believe, when we talk about inclusivity, there is no better social welfare policy than a well-paid job and a fulfilling career, and an ambition that permeates a society, that a society believes and has confidence in itself. And those incredible industries like ours, like the drug discovery businesses that can come out of places like University of Dundee and the biotech clusters, these are what we need to shoot for. And we can't undershoot, we can't underestimate, and we can't lack in confidence when we believe that those are the beginnings of what comes next. But to do that, and I'm delighted to come with sort of semi-prepared piece today and listen to some of the comments that were made, because there was incredible comments that got right to the heart of the challenge of education. I don't need to repeat the wonderful contribution earlier about the lack of talented teachers and resource to turn out the talented human beings that are going to help me scale to the next generation of what we're doing now. But it's a disaster out there. And it is a disaster that I think will be partially solved by AI-delivered, technology-delivered and supported solutions. It's the only way, because nobody's truly listening. You know, that classic thing of the right time to build a forest or to plant trees was 25, 30 years ago. Well, we actually did that in the games industry. Abertay University were incredible in their early years of actually listening to us as an industry, taking a massive risk and becoming the first university in the world to formally certificate computer games as a subject area. Today, they are the only university outside the United States in the top 10 globally in this sector, and they remain an absolute pioneer. That's when we did it. The second best time to plant a tree is today. Is get on with it and do it. And we need to plant trees, though. As multiple people have said, this cannot be solved in a year, cannot be solved in a parliamentary cycle. We need to invest for decades to come in the talent base that needs to be fit for purpose. In a world which I'm fond of saying we've never existed in a time of faster change than we exist today, and it will never be as slow again. Just let that drop into your head. It's as fast as it's ever been. We're struggling to cope with the pace of change. It'll never be this slow again. It's going to exponentially increase in terms of pace of change from here on in. And we need to equip every human being in our society to be part of that, to be productive and constructive and create full stop, which will create wealth. So, ladies and gentlemen, from my perspective, I think Scotland is entirely set up for success if we believe it and we grab the opportunity and we align ourselves with everyone around us to send that message out there for people to come here and create based on the one natural resource that we have more of than I think as a percentage of population than anyone, and it's talent. You know, yes, wind power is fantastic. Those bits of infrastructure we've got, great. But really, it's all about raw talent. I'm going to leave you by telling you that 5 years ago, my business partner, Paddy, and I knew that our journey with Minecraft was coming to its sunset. We were delighted. We thought we'd maybe get 18 months out of this deal. It's now 15 years and we're still part of it. The movies helped us this year. For anybody that knows what a chicken jockey is, I pity you. But from here, 5 years ago, we started planting the seeds for our next generation of technology. We looked at NVIDIA GPUs and what they could do for us. Not just accelerate graphics, not just generic AI, but specifically, we put our best technologists 5 years ago into developing algorithms, in our case, which help procedurally generated worlds exist in a way that they've never done before. And believe me, we've done it. We have a technology that's 100 times faster empirically than anything else in the world. We've got global businesses in our industry who are desperate to know how they can partner with us and what we've done. We announced it to the world in September. 3 weeks ago, we made it available to 512 people to give us a preliminary test. Nobody reacted. That means there are absolutely no geeks in the room, because 512 is a quite important number in the world of computer science, along with 1,024 and others. But those 512 people in 3 weeks have generated millions of data points for us. We're measuring and using analytics in our own AI platforms to help them inform where we go with the future. This game that we have built is so powerful. We believe our purpose now is to serve a community which will, we believe, number hundreds of millions of people to engage in our game called Reforge for decades to come. And our analogy is, we're like Fender. We make the greatest musical instruments on the planet, and I can kind of play them, but not very well. I'm looking for Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton and you know, Brian May to come to our game and take us to the world. And it's going to happen here in Scotland. It's going to happen in our studios in Dundee and Edinburgh. It'll happen worldwide, but the world, in our industry, the world is really coming to Scotland. In September this year, we are hosting for the first time the American Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, equivalent of the Oscars for games, their European conference. And the Scottish Government have been phenomenal in supporting me to make sure that comes to Scotland. And they helped me invite, for the first time in our history, one of the main board of Nintendo, an incredibly quiet and tight company, is coming to Scotland for the first time to really find out why the magic happens here. And I think our relationship is going to develop for years to come. So I just wanted to give you a quick flash of, hopefully, excitement about one sector. I could speak all day about the many other related sectors that we invest in, but Scotland's future is unbelievably bright. The jobs of the future are here. We just need to make sure that we put ourselves in a position to win. Thank you.